In this unit, we'll be discussing intervals. When we talk about intervals in a musical context, we are referring to the distance between notes. In other words, how much higher or how much lower one note sounds compared to some other note. When we talk about intervals, we could be talking about intervals between notes that are played at the same time or harmonically, or notes that are played in succession, melodically. This concept of intervals is one of the fundamental building blocks in understanding Western music theory, and we'll see the implications of that both within this course as early as our study of counterpoint later in this unit, and beyond this course as you continue in your theoretical study. We've already begun to broach the topic of intervals in prior work. We've talked about half steps and whole steps, which form sort of the raw material for intervals. We've also talked about the circle of fifths, with the fifth, or the perfect fifth, forming one of the most important intervals in all of tonal music. One really key concept we talk about in intervals is that spelling counts. In other words, we look at the actual naming of the notes in question, or the notes that we're trying to build, in understanding how to describe or label our intervals. So I want to begin to explore that by studying this concept of generic intervals. Understanding generic intervals probably makes the most sense if we look at two kind of abstractions of music, which is to say the musical alphabet and then how music is represented on the staff. The smallest interval we tend to discuss is the unison, and the idea of the unison implies that there is no motion from one note to the next. They're in essentially the same place. We can talk about unisons in a generic sense by looking at, for example, the note A. If you go from one A to another A in the very same octave, that is considered a unison. Now, as a generic interval, we highlight the fact that perhaps one of the A's is natural while the other A is flat. So even though they have two different accidentals, the fact that it's still an A within the same octave still makes it some kind of unison. As we refine our discussion towards specific intervals, we can talk about how moving from A natural to another A natural in the same octave is a different kind of unison than moving from an A natural to an A flat within that octave, but they are both some kind of unisons. And that's what we mean by a generic interval. One A to another A, any kind of A, within the same octave is some kind of unison. Beyond the unison, there is the second. If we start at an A and then move up to a B, it doesn't matter what kind of A we had, A sharp, A natural, A flat, A double sharp, to what kind of B, B flat, B natural. In terms of generic intervals, any kind of A that travels up to any kind of B is traveling up by some kind of second. Similarly, traveling down from some kind of A to some kind of G would constitute going down some kind of second. So continuing on with our basic understanding of generic intervals, starting at a note and moving to a note that has the same letter within the same octave is some kind of unison. Going up a letter or going down a letter constitutes traveling a second. Going up or down another letter still constitutes a third, and so on. After we've made it through the seventh, the next interval, rather than calling it an eighth, we'll call it an octave. So if we start with our original A and then travel down to the next A below it, that is an octave. Now again, in terms of generic intervals, it doesn't matter sharp, flat, or natural. Moving from one A down to the next available A is some kind of octave.